Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another session of Leadership Spotlight series. Thank you so much for loving this series and encouraging and motivating me to come back every fortnight with a new leader, someone who's a powerhouse of talent and an inspiration to many. And today I am extremely happy and delighted to have a superwoman leader with us who has been absolutely rocking the corporate world for the last 25 plus years with her exemplar leadership skills. Please join me in welcoming Debjani Roy. Welcome, Debjani, or Debbie, as you like to be called.
Hi, how are you, Shivani?
All good, all well. How have you been?
Well, I've been busy, and that I think is a lot to say in the current times, right?
Yes.
It can always be better, but then I'm not complaining.
Awesome. Awesome to have you with us today. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you. And
Likewise, likewise.
thank you. For our audience, let me introduce Devjani. So, a human resource and L&D professional with 25 plus years of corporate experience, with an established reputation of providing transformative people leadership across, Devjani has handled the complete gamut of HR activities across various industries, be it manufacturing, telecom, information technology, hospitality, travel, and healthcare. She's worked with very reputed companies such as Bharti Telecom, HCL Technologies, Bentley, and Pune Travels. Her last assignment was with the SRL Limited as their Chief People Officer. Very recently, Devjani has taken the leap of faith and started her own HR advisory firm called Wind Beneath the Wings. Beautiful name. Offering basket of services to the corporate world as well as to universities and colleges. She's also the chief HR advisor to a startup company called Mind Your Fleet, which is also Chromosome Software Private Limited, and is a mentor and advisor to many corporates and education institutions. Wow, that's quite a journey and a very inspirational one for a lot of people. Once again, Devjani, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Super. So, today we're going to talk about a very sensitive topic, which is leadership, something that has become even more sensitive and difficult in these times. We've been in the most chaotic times of our lives since the last 1.5 years. We've always been sort of talking about the VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But we've seen it in its most profound manner only in the last 16 months, and especially for people who are leaders, this has been an even more challenging time. So, Devjani, for the benefit of our audience, would you like to define the word chaos in the context of leadership? What do we mean by leadership in the times of chaos, since that's our topic for today? Over to you. You're on
Thank
mute.
you, thank you, Shivani. That's a question. That's a whole lot of things actually put very well together. You started off with VUCA, walked into chaos, talked about challenges to leadership therein. That's a whole lot in one kettle. Um,
Yes.
See, the VUCA world is not something which we are experiencing new today.
Yeah.
I have every reason to believe that we have been dabbling with it for at least more than 5 years now, in some parts or the other, in some form or
Right.
the other. However, it was not as large and as big a phenomena in your face the way it is today as it
Yeah.
used to be earlier. That's probably the primary difference.
Right.
Chaos. Now, that word is a fascinating word. Chaos
Yes.
to me is when the unprecedented and the unexpected
Hmm.
walks into predictable circumstances. That's when chaos happens. So there's a set
Awesome.
of, there's a boundary that you have in everything
Yeah.
that you do. There's
Yeah.
a predictability associated with it. There is a
Yeah.
form and a substance that you've got used to over a period of time. And
Right.
suddenly, what have you? There are some tectonic forces, there are some changes that take place in the external as well as the internal dynamics. And those boundaries, those forms and substances gets knocked about. It's suddenly a different paradigm, it's suddenly a different kind of circumstances. Situations change for themselves, which in itself is a challenge, because it is not the expected, it is the unexpected which is suddenly staring you in your face. on
Absolutely.
one hand on one hand Shivani, if you ask me, chaos is a master of the game because it tests you, and it is
Yeah.
probably a challenge which brings the best out of those who
Yeah.
also don't know that they have a lot of talent within themselves and are not tested enough to show that
Right.
prowess during stable state operations. So it's
Right.
a test case which can always bring out the best in a person. Okay,
Absolutely.
provided you have the fire in the belly, provided you have the risk taking ability, provided
Yeah.
you have the resilience and the adaptability to be able to cope with it.
Yeah.
However, for the greater part of the masses who are not so queasy about it and
Hmm.
who don't warm up to chaos and who
Hmm.
like being in comfort zones, it
Hmm.
can be quite a heavy change.
Yes.
And when I say change, it takes a lot to get used to that change. This is not
Yes.
change like, we just discuss, change is often the most constant in the world. All those cliched sayings,
Yeah.
is not similar to this kind of a change, which really
Yes.
tests you at your fundamental level. So
Right.
if you talk to me as a manager, as a human being, as a leader, as a workforce person,
Hmm.
I would say that 2 years, 2.5 years back, before the pandemic had actually happened,
Hmm.
despite whatever little digitization was there in the offing, whatever VUCA was actually presenting itself to us, we were still in a sort of stable state operation.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
still had controllable forces. Our
Yeah.
locus of control was still within ourselves, and
Hmm.
we could manage to sort of swim through every tide that was coming our way. But
Right.
today, post dynamic, it's no longer the same. It's
Yeah.
very, very unusual. It's very new. There are enough, I think, norms and abbreviations that are being used for the current set of practices that you can see around yourself. But
Yeah.
it'll suffice to say that it's that particular time of our life where you are finally put to the test, a,
Yeah.
a real test to show that you have the ability to cope up and be a part of the new reality. So that's
Absolutely.
what I think chaos does for anybody, whether they are in the leadership cycle, whether they are in a managerial cycle, whether they are even a homemaker at home, is
Yeah.
facing a very different dilemma today. So
Absolutely.
anybody and everybody has a new reality in front of them.
Absolutely. Very well put. I would say, what you made a very, very relevant point saying that the VUCA world was always there. And we all knew there's a VUCA world and we were dealing with it and we were managing it. But what happened is something very unexpected. So the unexpected staring at your face and you don't know what to do. I think that's what has happened and has led to the
Yes.
chaos part
Yes.
to it. So very, very, very valid, points you've made there. So in such a scenario, in such a chaotic scenario, Devjani, what are some of the challenges that a leader usually faces? Because now there's a transition from business as usual to business unusual. So what are some of the challenges that a leader would face in these times, or leaders are facing in these times?
So every leader has an ongoing challenge with bandwidth. That's the
Hmm.
first premise I'd like to address. And when
Sure.
I say bandwidth, there is a certain amount of bandwidth which is external to a leader, and there is a certain amount of bandwidth which is internal to a leader.
Hmm.
I think when such things happen and you move towards the unusual,
Hmm.
the first thing that gets knocked is the bandwidth which sits inside the leader. Because what is leadership? Leadership is nothing but a functionality in response to
Yeah.
situations around you. Okay?
Yeah.
And because it's a response factor, it's not
Right.
something which is practiced every day on an even keel. That's why leaders are different from one to the other. Okay?
Right.
They can be as different as chalk and cheese depending upon the kind of responses they bring to the table. Now,
Hmm.
when the unusual happens, even if there is a certain amount of leadership skill and competence that somebody has gotten used to in the earlier paradigm, suddenly he or she finds themselves operating in a very different dynamic. To
Hmm.
give you to give you very realistic examples,
Hmm.
I may have been one of the strongest leaders in a physical sense, in a sense that I was heading a company 6,000 people plus. Okay,
Right.
everybody present in a physical space, right? Walking into a glass and chrome building every morning, okay?
Yeah.
Used to boardroom discussions as the first thing happening at the start of the week, okay? And then wrapping up the week with a Friday evening party maybe
Mm.
taking some cohorts along and
Yeah.
closing the week with a desire to start the next week on an even better keel. So that
Right.
would be my typical syndrome of response in
Yeah.
a previous circumstances.
Mm.
And what have I today? I have no physical space. The first
Yeah.
thing that's
Yeah.
evaporated is a
Yeah.
non-physical space. Okay.
Right.
And I am not even sure tomorrow, despite all the, all the expert opinions coming my way, whether it's going to be a
The
completely
same.
VUCA dynamic, whether it's
Yeah.
going to be again 60% people coming back to
Yeah.
offices, or whether it is going to be a better hybrid of a 40-50, a 50-50, or
Yeah.
is it still going to be an 80% working out of homes, because suddenly organizations have woken up to a lot of savings and a lot
Yeah.
of margins that they can
Yeah.
make with this new kind of workforce management. So
Absolutely.
then my internal bandwidth as a leader is severely challenged,
Yeah.
because I no longer have the trappings
Yeah.
and the encumbrances which I was used to every morning as a CEO or a CHRO or a CXO walking into a glass and chrome building. I'm
Yeah.
having to sit back at home.
Yeah.
The maximum that I can do is to probably snatch or steal a couple of travels. And believe you me, I'm telling you out of experience. There are some of us leaders who are getting so wildly affected with FOMO, the fear
Mm.
of missing
Fear of.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the FOMO is not only hitting the Gen Z, the FOMO is
Mm.
probably hitting the baby boomers even more. Okay,
Mm.
so there's this whole idea of, oh my God, as a leader, I'm not seen anymore. I'm
Yeah.
not being seen as doing anything substantial. I am
Yeah.
at the back. I'm now a back end worker,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
as sitting at home, I've got to rake up mechanisms by way of which I can align my team. I can
True.
reach out to them. My communication ability has to be at the best, because this is the time when, by structured and non structured mechanisms, I have to be in touch with every member of my
Right.
organization so that I don't lose on productivity. I don't
Yeah.
lose on getting the right messages across. So it's a huge call, it's a huge demand on a skill set
Absolutely.
which probably was not really as apparent as it was yesterday. I'm not
Absolutely.
saying that the challenges were not there yesterday, but the challenges were of a very different kind. But
Right.
today, the challenges are really intrinsic. It's calling at our characteristics. It
Yeah.
requires you to be a lot more outgoing. It
Yeah.
requires you to be a lot more empathetic. And it,
Yeah.
it, it, it requires authentic leadership. It's not so much
Absolutely.
for you to stand up on a podium and make a speech and get
Yes.
along with it. It's
Yes.
something where people are looking at you sitting at homes and thinking, can my leader reach out to me? Can he or she promise me a work pattern tomorrow, which is at least going to help me sustain myself? So that's at the
Absolutely.
core level that somebody is trying to reach out to you. And to be
Yeah.
able to assuage those fears and respond accordingly is the current call of every leader, which I think is a bit at a discount today. Not
Yeah.
everybody is able to shape up to that and to actually leverage those qualities to the extent possible, because you either have those qualities or you
Oh, yeah.
probably don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Very strong points made, Devjani. I'm sure leaders who are listening to us today would resonate a lot with what you have said. We talk about bandwidth issues, but nobody talks about the inner bandwidth. That you just mentioned about bandwidth. Normally, people associate with the workload or
Yeah,
the
the
paucity of
manpower.
team,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
manpower, the paucity of team. But you brought
correct.
out a very beautiful point of an inner, I would say, an inner engineering probably that one needs to do to adapt to these kind of times, as far as bandwidth is concerned. And you're very right. We are social human beings. I mean, whether we are a leader or we are a team member, we are all social animals, and that touch, that physical connect is definitely missing. And it like you rightly said, it puts a lot of pressure on people who are trying to lead teams. Talking about myself, in this pandemic, we've onboarded a couple of people, but believe me, as a leader, it's very difficult to sort of keep the team together, because it's only technology at the end of the day that you fall back on.
Yeah,
And that camaraderie, that sense of belongingness is definitely missing. So and I completely get you when you say that leaders, it becomes very difficult for leaders. And yes, definitely an effort has to be made to sort of work double to make my presence felt. I'm sure a lot of leaders would resonate that with that as well, because we're all used to that typical boardroom conversation in the morning and happy hours on a Friday evening. So, and that is definitely missing. So completely get your points. But in this let me flip the discussion a little bit now. In the times of uncertainty, what do employees and organizations expect from a leader? What are some of the expectations in terms of the leader's role in the times of crisis? How would employees want to see their leaders in such times?
To be very honest, everybody in a moment of chaos, everybody in a moment of turmoil and tribulations of the kind that we are facing today, uh, they are no longer enamored by functional differentiations. They are no longer interested to understand which department, which division, which business unit is doing what profits are being notched up, how are they performing. All that can be outside of those windows, okay, as long
Yeah,
as they are concerned. We're talking about the common workforce, we're talking about the
yeah,
common man who is earning their bread and butter from your organization. For
absolutely.
them, leadership, more than anything else, has to be the human factor. Leadership for
True.
everything, whether it's the CEO of the company, whether it's their own department head, whether it's the CMO, the CTO, everybody, down to the last executive of the team, they have to exemplify and demonstrate attributes which are that of a human touch feel industry. Because
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, what are we? We're still human beings, okay? As you
Yes.
rightly said, Shivani, we are a social animal. Every part of us cries out for socialization processes. Every part
Absolutely.
of us wants to be felt, valued, to be known as an identity. Everyone wants to belong. The
Yeah.
whole idea of belongingness, which is so different today from what it used to be, let's say 10 years back, that
Yeah.
time, pride and belongingness used to be measured by annual long service awards. That's not what it is today. That's
Yes.
not what your normal employee is looking for at the workplace. Today, it is
True.
the employee experience, whether it is a 6 month experience or a 1 year or a 10 year for that matter. It is the experience which is qualifying for whether he feels belonged or not, whether he feels valued or not. And that ultimately is going to make the difference between who he thinks is the leader of the moment. So if I'm
Absolutely.
somebody who takes out a direction tomorrow from an office that yes, 70% of my population needs to work from home, okay? And I give a diktat that you go back home and you start working like that. And what happens? You don't even put at the back end policies and features which are going to help those people create
Yeah.
work ready homes. See, work from home comes out of work ready homes.
Absolutely.
If you have a single bedroom small dynamic
Yeah.
studio apartment, where
Yeah.
the hell do you put up an office? Okay,
Absolutely.
if you are a
Completely.
nuclear family and you share responsibilities, especially for the women, of
Yeah.
raising a child who's 2 to 3 years of age, how do you convince or make that little baby understand that you're on a call for 6 hours out of 8 hours in a day?
Yeah.
God Almighty, that's when your empathy, your ability to
Yes.
reach out and create some people friendly policies will
Yeah.
help make that person understand on the other end that yes, there
Absolutely.
is humanness, there is wellness, there is somebody who's genuinely interested to keep us alive and well. And that is what will finally walk the talk. Because today is the time when it's no longer a concern about profitability and whether the balance sheet is looking healthy. That
Hmm.
will look healthy only if you take care of your people.
People.
And taking care of the people is the most cardinal principle today in the dynamic that we are in. Because if we are not careful about doing enough now, we won't have a workforce to talk about tomorrow.
Absolutely. Brilliant points. I think what you've said is amazing. I think what matters in today's time, and the only expectation probably employees have now is that empathy, and for which people, it's not just HR probably, it's the business leaders, it's the line
Yeah,
managers also
absolutely.
who have
Yeah.
to reach out and exemplify this empathy. In fact, you talked about employee experience. Now, it's a reality how employee welfare or employee engagement or employee experience has transitioned. Because the other day I got a call from one of my clients, a corporate client. A slightly it's in the manufacturing sector, so slightly old practices were in. So they were talking about they were asking us to design a 30-60-90 process for all the new hires, because they wanted to ensure that the experience that they are giving to their employees in the 30 days, in the 60 days, in the 90 days, and then they wanted one more at the end of the year. They wanted to be sure that they were giving an absolutely delightful experience to the Gen Z that they are hiring. So I completely resonate with what you said, that it's all about employee experience. And today, if we don't take care of our people, tomorrow we won't have probably any people to talk about or work with. So absolutely brilliant points made there. And I can see the audience is also very thrilled by the points that you've made. Now, coming to the second part of our topic today, it talks about social behavior syndrome. So, what do we mean by that, and how does it weave into the concept of leadership?
Just like every other faculty of the human being, and it emanates again from the same thought process that we just now described, which is both you and me. We made a point out of the fact that the human being is an ultimate social animal. Okay,
Absolutely.
so we don't actually live in isolation. We are not creatures who are made out of living in islands. We need reciprocative, what do I say,
Yes.
positive strokes. We require
Yes.
positive strokes and reciprocity at every level, to be told,
Absolutely.
to be felt, to be needed, to feel alive, to be felt vibrant. And everything that we do, for instance, even what we are doing now, which is you posing a question to me and I responding to that question, after all, it's the same phenomena of an equal reaction, okay, to an action. And if we carry that same principle ahead, then what leadership, every aspect of our behavior is actually emanating out of a social environment, a social
Right.
condition. So today,
Right.
when you talk about the pandemic, when you talk about the huge differences that have come across, both in the economy, the society, the polity, everything is changing because of this terrible thing that has actually affected us, and we don't seem to be actually looking at an end to it, even now in the foreseeable
Right.
future.
Yeah.
There's a delta, gamma, beta, I don't know what all is happening, but there seems to be the viruses which are multiplying, manifold. In such
Right.
situations, how can even leadership be looked at in isolation? It
Yeah.
still will emerge as a response to this new social factor. And that
Right.
is why that is why leadership, which a lot there's a lot of debate which goes on about leadership, is it a born with skill or is it an acquired skill? Okay, and I've had
Absolutely the
good
debate.
amount of fraternity people, debate on both sides, and both seem
Yeah.
to be making some conclusion or the other. But at least in this paradigm, I can say with a certain amount of guarantee that it cannot be an acquired skill to that extent that you really manage to learn all the skills and all the responses overnight to be able to really become the leader who's required in today's society. So, my question
Absolutely.
is, therefore, that is leadership also, like every other behavioral function of the human mind, is also contingent on the kind of social circumstances which abound around you. And I would like to believe that yes, it is so. That is why we see so much of differentiation between the
Yeah.
quality of leaders which are emerging in the new dynamic. you
Right.
you have people today who were not even considered rich enough or ripe enough to take on a very, very eclectic leadership, which is at an intellectual level. But that
Right.
intellectual prowess has given a lot of our leaders to sink into the mindset of the larger workforce as people who have a very humane side of mind. And that
True.
is what is bringing relationships together. On the other
Absolutely.
hand, the more bombastic, the more gregarious, the more outlandish leaders, who made it by being all over the place. There was a visual dynamic, there was a wow factor. They were probably God's nearest creature to mankind. Some of them are failing because they are not able to understand that there is a reality which is far more grounded and which
Yeah.
requires a far more ground level requirement, a touch and feel, a beautiful smile, two words of subsistence, a good pat on the back, okay, some reassurances, which is nothing gregarious, which is nothing bombastic. Okay, but
Absolutely.
by doing so, you can possibly convert a lot of the tried and tribulated, tested minds today to people who will start feeling reassured by your presence. So, the very fact that we can see for ourselves the differences arising out of the today's leadership syndrome tells me that possibly there's a greater truth in this
Yeah.
being a functionality of the social syndrome that we are going through today.
Absolutely. And I think the debate, it's a never-ending debate that leadership is an acquired skill or is it a natural inborn quality that one has. I, tend to agree with you that it cannot be 100% acquired skill. If it is 100% acquired skill, it, shows up. In some time, it shows up that the person doesn't have a natural flair for leadership. But yes, it is something probably one can work on and improve, but one needs to have
Yes,
an innate quality of leadership, to
yes,
start with. And a lot of it, like you rightly said, depends on the social circumstances that surround the person. For example, I'll give you a very simple example. For example, a child, who has always been, helped by parents in taking all decisions in their lives. We call them helicopter parents in the current, scenario. So a child who's had helicopter parents probably will not, learn how to take decisions even at a future date. And I've seen people like that. Vis-a-vis a child who's been left to fend on his own, not in terms of, the necessities, but definitely in terms of taking career decisions, and owning up their own decisions. I think they tend to become far more independent and confident in taking decisions, and hence end up being good leaders at some point in time. So I completely agree on the social, surrounding point of view. So,
and if I may just add here, Shivani,
sure.
we
Yeah.
sometimes we sometimes make little out of the contextual, or the the kind of scholarly articles or scholarly practices that have given us a lot of theory. Okay,
Hmm.
we make
Hmm.
little of it. We feel that they don't have the application ability to stand on their feet, but that's not
Right.
true. Just see
Right.
what you talked about, the children being conditioned in two different sets. The same theory was put forth as the XY theory by Hawthorne, who actually practiced this years and years back when he took a
Yes.
set of children and put them into underprivileged circumstances and he put them into privileged circumstances, and he realized that the way the value systems and the beliefs that came with those two kinds of social syndromes conditioned the mindset of the children in such a manner that they actually acquired the
Yeah.
characteristics of that
Yeah.
particular kind of a society. So it is something that we need to understand at a far more fundamental level. Okay,
Yes.
that some of those theories that have been thrown at us are not just for books to be gathering dust,
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time it is not enough to just know about them, but to continuously apply them and
True.
resonate in the current circumstances. That's
True.
what makes learning such a beautiful journey.
Absolutely, it does. And you spoke about the leadership as an acquired behavior. Now, for people, specifically for people to whom leadership does not come naturally, or for whom it's an acquired behavior, how can such leaders prevent themselves from failing in the challenging times? For example, now is the time which is a very challenging time. So, people who are not natural leaders, or for whom it's an acquired skill, how do they cope up?
Well, I will say, I will quote a few actual practices happening today. Some of my brethren on the other side may not like my saying what I'm saying today, but these are realities which I'm finding happening around me. Um, a lot of people, a lot of us, let's put the name to it, a lot of us who have
Hmm.
actually been very, very successful, as I said, in the last 20 years in a stable state organizations. Okay,
Hmm.
moved from one to another in a very even keel stream, even keel streamlined, hierarchies. They are finding it tough to carry on now, because they
Yeah.
are, they are neither at the age They are primarily at their twilight ages. Okay, they are neither at the age of exuberance, nor are they at the learning curve of being an early practitioner to be able to actually acquire what is required with the kind of
Right.
energy levels which is
Right.
required today. Okay,
Right.
so what's really happening, and when I take a cross section of some of the examples that I'm seeing around myself, there are many of us who are bidding a buy to the corporate. Okay, there are many of us who are saying to ourselves that, okay, I have led my life in a certain manner, looks like those days are finally over. Now, those days being over probably is also an indication for me to do things a little differently and try for things to be a little different. Can I take a step back and think about where, therefore, with already what I've acquired and what I've achieved in life, how can I push the envelope that much more, in which direction, to be able to at least continue to be relevant and continue to actually have a proper journey for myself, even for the next 10 to 15 years? Okay, so
True.
there are a good set of people who, with very objective eyes and with a very sensible approach, are actually asking these questions around. And many of them not only are finding partnerships, not only are finding entrepreneurial
Yeah.
abilities today, but they're also getting into family businesses, things that
Yeah.
they never considered earlier. But suddenly they
Yes.
are joining up with members of family and creating a kind of a cohort which is making them relevant and do things which they must have at one point of time contemplated doing. So that's
Right.
one approach to it. Okay,
Sure.
and that can be a very, very common sense way of moving away from a path of failure. Because if
Right.
you continue to push the envelope too much in what you're doing, and you
Yeah.
are not able to cope up with what is required, then
Yeah.
there will come a day where either you will be eased out of the system or you will fall flat, not being able to take the heat anymore.
Very
So
true.
this is a very prudent approach that I see a lot of people taking. There are
Very
the
true.
others. There are others who are on the other side of the fulcrum, who have it in them, who have that inborn ability to scale up, who have that ability to actually learn. They're hungry. They are still ambitious enough to say that, yes, I can take that extra mile. I'm not stopping right here. So they're actually putting their best levers forward. They're getting into a learning cycle again. They're imbibing different characteristics. And that is where the acquired part, because you have
Right.
to understand, Shivani, that leadership is ultimately a little higher in intellectual acumen. Otherwise, they
Absolutely.
won't be there, right?
Yes.
At least
Yes.
with that intellectual ability that people have at that level, they are able to find ways in which they are still be able to capitalize on some of the qualities that they carry with themselves. So
True.
there is a good group which is fighting the odds and which is still, trying to stay relevant in the continuing paradigm. And then
Absolutely.
there are the others who are just taking it the way they are.
Mm.
Neither are they making efforts to learn. They
Mm.
continue to be caught on cross purposes. They continue to take the hits. They are facing it very strong today. They know that the longevity,
Yeah.
okay, of that career span for them is really coming down. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm not able to see how far they are able to sustain that journey, but
Yeah.
in the interest of the fraternity, I would like to think that they find a way out before it is too late. Otherwise, a lot of people around them will get affected.
Absolutely. I think the brunt of this kind of a leadership is on the people around them.
People,
It's
that's
the
my
people.
problem. That's my problem. It's not about the leaders, because they've already
Yes.
basked in their glory. They've already
Yes.
minted whatever success they had for themselves. But then
Absolutely.
we need to be prudent about to understand that a leader has a responsibility to others more than himself.
Absolutely agree with you.
That's the
And
definition of leadership. And if
absolutely.
i'm unable to if I'm unable to scale up to that level, then I need to consider what else can I do for myself before it starts becoming an absolute guillotine on the head of the people that I've led so far.
Absolutely. And I think I'm sure a lot of us would have worked with such leaders. I personally have worked with such leaders who probably struggled with this as a natural trait. And in the process, the team ended up, getting demotivated, getting
Yes.
the flack. and not learning anything, and absolutely feeling very, very low on confidence about themselves. So I think the prime responsibility for a leader to improve is for him, for not for himself but for the team as well. And
Yes.
I would say a very balanced answer you've given to this. All the three sides you've very beautifully picked up, of the people who are trying to work on it, of the people who know they can't work on it. So they're in the realm of that self awareness where they know they can't do much about it. So rather than that, look for alternate options, career options. And the third category, which is unaffected, which is I would say indifferent, but ultimately somewhere I feel such people also don't have longevity in their careers, because there's only as much as this kind of a behavior takes you, especially in today's times when you are dealing with people, employees, youngsters who know their minds, who know what they want, and there are enough opportunities for the talented people out there. So nobody wants to work with demotivated leaders. Super. We have some questions coming in from the audience. So I'll just take one question before I move on to mine. So we have a question from Vaishnavi here. With so much emphasis given on mental health wellness of employees these days, how can leaders ensure psychological safety of their employees? Good question.
Very, very good question, and very pertinent question in today's reality. I just very fleetingly touched upon it about towards the start of our discussion, when I said that when you actually put people in situations of work from home, you
Yeah.
also have to make sure that you create work ready homes. And when I
Right.
talk about work ready homes, which is WRH, is instead of WFH, it's also the work WRH. That's
Absolutely.
when mental, psychological, economic, all wellness factors will have to be taken into account. So today, when you
Right.
ask me what should be the prudent approach of a CEO, a CHRO, and a CFO sitting together, drawing up the next best strategy for workforce profitability and motivation at the same time, I would think that rather than the pedestrian ways of approaching policy making like yesterday, where everybody was in office, there were no
Yeah.
differences in terms of work situations and work
Yeah.
conditions. Okay, it was not a question of the family being drawn so much into the ambit of the active family working life. We have to move away from that thought process.
Yeah.
We have to think about, if there is a 24 by 7 office which is there to stay, how
Yeah.
do I compensate the person for it? What
Absolutely.
are the few benefits from an HR standpoint that I can do? Can I say that the calls, the kind of meetings that we are enforcing you with, which would have been a very natural thing in the office space, but is definitely not natural at the home, okay,
True.
which should have a different ambience by itself, by definition. At least I curtail it to 2 days or 3 days in a week. And I make sure that for the rest of the 4 days, they are
Yeah.
no call days, unless
Yeah.
it's an emergency and it's well
Yeah.
scheduled. That
Yeah.
would give you a lot of psychological,
Safety.
reassurance.
Yeah.
At least
Absolutely.
people will know that I'm in a safe zone. I'm not being pulled into here and there. I'm not scattered all over the place. Okay,
Yeah.
so that gives a lot of psychological reassurance. Also, the kind of insurance policies, the
Yes.
kind of coverages that you have to give to people, it needs to
Yes.
cover your family members far more expertly. You've got to bundle up your insurance in such a manner that, yes, I know, I mean, our organizations will look at their bottom line as to where is my investment and where is my expenditure moving up. But I
Yeah.
would say, don't look at it as an expenditure, look at it as an investment. Because if
Absolutely.
you don't do this at this juncture, as I
Yeah.
said, you will have no workforce to work with tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And the biggest job of assuring psychological safety lies on the leader of the pack, which is the CEO.
True.
He has no jobs. He doesn't have to really ascertain that the money gets funneled or the policies are getting made. He just has to give the direction. But at the end
True.
of the day, the fact that he will call up, he will have collective Zoom calls,
Yeah.
small group activities where he draws in people, calls them by name, talks to them about what's happening to the family, how are the children taking it, what is he or she doing in terms of socializing in these difficult
Right.
times. Are they getting some de-stress avenues, or can the organization also do something in that direction? I think this is the kind of consulting role which the CEO needs to adapt. So the
Absolutely.
CEO today is not a CEO, has to be a consultant, has to be the head of the pack, who is one among equals, who should feel the pinch of if he was to go through the same phenomena of a work from
Empathy.
home, what would
Yeah.
be his own expectations to cover up for that. And this
Absolutely.
is the holistic three-pronged strategy by way of which the psychological, the economic, and the social well-being of the workforce can be taken care of.
Beautiful, wonderful. I would say you hit the nail on the head. Everybody talks about WFM, or WFH, which is work from home, or WFA these days, which is work from anywhere. But
Right.
hardly anybody talks about, WRH, which is work ready homes, or work ready, spaces. I think,
It's something as simple as we take for granted that as
yes,
a junior software engineer will have a bandwidth or a broadband connection as large as anything at home. Why should you use that as an assumption?
yes,
Did he
absolutely.
ever need it yesterday? There were a lot of people
Yeah.
who did not even have a broadband connection and used the
Yes.
phone and whatever 4Gs and 3Gs they had to cover up for
Yes,
everything that they required. So today,
absolutely.
when you are enforcing that necessity, it just falls upon us to make sure that we do it
We
in a
do have,
manner, yeah, that there is a shared responsibility, and that we
absolutely.
don't push people into a zone of economic depravity by
Yes,
on one hand slashing salaries, rationalizing pays, doing pay cuts, but at the other hand making them pay for things that they were not really doing yesterday. I mean,
absolutely.
how much more brutal can you be?
Yes, and I think it's all about understanding this, that not everybody is in the same economic zone that people can afford. Like you said, people living in one BHK apartments. Now, there's a child who has to do their online classes, and there are parents who are working, and there are elderly who are who are living in the same home. So it becomes definitely difficult. But do we understand that as a leader? I think that's what probably is going to define this psychological safety that we are talking about. And also, one more very beautiful point, in this second wave that was so devastating, we did see many companies and many leaders come forward and help their people in a lot of
Yes.
ways, and not necessarily just monetary ways, but also, ways that were, in terms of, finding hospital beds, oxygen,
Yeah.
etc. So,
Yeah.
I see even till today on social media employees being eternally grateful for that. I mean, they would have got their promotions, their increments in the past year, but this, helping them at the time of a crisis is what stays with them, and
Oh,
I
it
think
meant
that
everything.
defines,
It meant
it
everything.
means everything. And if you're talking about, insurance, family insurance, etc., well, if you're looking at it as a cost, I would say prior to the pandemic we were spending money on offsites, we were spending money on team building activities, going out, all of that, but we're saving all of that now. And in today's times, I think if you offer a wellness program, or if you offer a family insurance, like the way you said, comprehensive insurance, I think that would have a far more, I would say, value to an employee rather than
Yeah,
anything else. So it's just
absolutely.
a matter of shifting the perspective in these times, and probably that's
Shivani,
what works.
The kind of savings that companies have made today by exiting rental
Yes,
spaces,
absolutely.
that alone
Completely
is
agree.
enough to cover 100% employees for half the cost, okay, by giving some
Absolutely.
reassurance packages. Let me tell you that.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree with you on that. So, but what happens is that in times of these uncertainties, or these crisis times, a lot of leaders also end up losing their cool, and later they regret it. So, what's your advice for such leaders? How can leaders build that emotional resilience, especially during tough times? And
Uh,
particularly true for the ones for whom leadership is an acquired behavior. Again, I would come back to that.
Well, I'll be absolutely ruthless in this. Okay,
Please be.
ruthless because as a CHRO, I think it's our responsibility, especially this particular moment, is
Yeah.
becoming the biggest test for the HR fraternity. Okay,
Yeah.
when you see leadership lose its cool, that's
Yeah.
a behavioral aberration which you may still be able to withstand in other times of normalcy, but
Yeah.
when your organization is already pulling apart like a house of cards, when there's so many stress points, when
Yeah.
people are wondering if they have a job alive tomorrow, And on
Yeah.
top of that, you start behaving like this and you start throwing your arms and legs around. There can only be two ways. Either
Yeah.
that person be called inside the room and be coached and counseled and observed over a period of time.
Yeah.
The riot act should be read out to that person and be told that this is not the way we have to go forward. This is the time when we have to pool our resources, keep our equanimity in place, and make sure that we behave in the best of our ability so that we, through our body language and our words and our conduct, are able to give that reassurance to the people down the lines. So
Sure.
either they shape up to
Yeah.
that act, or the board gets into act, the
Yeah.
management gets into its play, and these unfortunately these leaders who refuse to acquire or become the new leader and wear the new cloak, they need to be shipped out. So this is probably the most crucial time where you need to ship up or
Yeah.
shape up or ship out. Okay, I don't see any other a third way of
Wait.
dealing with it, because time is at an absolute discount here. We
Yeah.
are moving fast. We've seen two waves, we are anticipating a third. In between, so much has happened to the human
Yes.
dynamic. Okay,
Yeah.
if we have to deal with the new human dynamic, if we have to make sure that we rebuild our societies, we re-enhance societal trust, faith, and the ability to pull in people together and create that kind of a governance mechanism and work profitability again, we will have to do a few things right. And the last
Absolutely.
thing that can happen in that syndrome is a wayward leader who doesn't
Yeah.
know how to behave or control himself in moments of
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah. I think very again a very pertinent point that you made. And in these situations, I think the role of HR and the role of the CHRO is pretty I would say tough, and something that I think they need to act more as mentors and coaches also. Because
Yes.
see, I don't blame the the sometimes I mean no kind of an aggressive behavior is any acceptable, but definitely because of the business pressures, leaders may also be facing a difficult time. So I think at that point in time, it's HR who needs to sort of anchor them and counsel them and be act as coaches, to help them out with it, rather than they not
That's
knowing where to
exactly,
go.
and that's exactly why I said that there can be two
Yeah.
approaches. You pull in the
Yeah.
person inside the room. Okay, you
Yes.
play you play the role of actually telling him that what is required, okay, what
Yes.
needs to be done. And I think you heard me when I said that we've got to pool in our efforts together. So at no
Absolutely.
point is the HR head or anybody else saying that you are in this alone and you fight your own battle. It's always a collective effort. It's always
Absolutely.
a single front which has to move together at this point of
True.
time, telling the workforce that we are still alive and we are doing our best. It that
True.
unity has to talk for itself. But coach,
Absolutely.
mentoring, everything said, the last option, if nothing works out,
Absolutely. Is to part.
before it's
Yeah.
crisis and before
Yeah.
you actually see that behavior creating
Yeah.
fractures which can no
Yeah.
longer be tended to, that's the time when you
Yes.
have to take some hard
Yes.
decisions.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. And I've seen it happening, not just in the pandemic. Prior to that, also, we've,
Yes, of
had
course.
leaders in the
Yeah.
past as well, who've been brilliant, at their field. But sadly, when it comes to people management, they're
Yeah.
probably, not the best people in the business. And ultimately, when the coaching and mentoring does not work, the organization has no option but to part ways with them. So completely with you on that. Being a woman leader, have you ever faced challenges in terms of leadership which were propelled, more on the basis of your gender rather than your role? In other words, as a woman leader, did you have to work harder to prove your mettle than your male counterparts?
I wish, Shivani, you did not ask me that question. Really, I wish no, uh, because it's almost like opening a Pandora's box. Okay, and when the Pandora's box gets opened, a lot of unsavory yet true facts come out. Okay,
Hmm.
when I look back in my journey of 26 years in the corporate, I can count numerous awards, success stories, accolades, all of that. okay, from juniors, seniors, peer groups, all of that. I told myself pretty early on in my career that I'm going to actually only carry those memories and images ahead. Because the moment you chose to think of the other side of the coin,
Yeah.
okay, and you thought about what is the price you had to pay to get
Yeah.
to the point that you did, some of the images and some of the memories that came flitting by, let me tell you, it caused you sleepless nights.
Yeah.
Okay? Starting from insinuations about your character to the way you made it to the top without enough competence, to being called manipulative,
Yeah.
to being forced to go through situations which were man made and not natural.
Yeah.
Okay, they were orchestrated, if I may use that word. Okay,
Sure.
to finally being told that what are you doing, you're a sheep in the middle of a pack of wolves, and you think you'll survive, in as many words. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yet,
Yeah.
Shivani, when I bid by in
Yeah.
2019, I was
Yeah.
on the board of directors. Okay, one woman in 16 people, 15 men and one woman in the boardroom.
Wow.
I was a signatory of two of my joint ventures in SRL Diagnostics.
Hmm.
So, my role was nowhere close to even operational HR. I had moved into the highest level of strategic positioning. Okay.
Sure.
I was
Sure.
already on the board of three emeritus companies as a board member. So,
Hmm.
if I look back and if I tell myself, was it all worth it? Yes, it was worth it. Because at that level, having struggled for 26 years and having made it to right to the top, there was
Right.
nothing that I wanted anymore. I had possibly achieved everything. The
Right.
only other thing I could have asked for was, and the only logical thing would have been for me to vie for a CEO position, which I never
Right.
wanted, which I honestly never
Sure.
wanted. Okay, I
Sure.
wanted to remain in HR. I wanted to retire from HR. I wanted to bid by finally from HR. But then the moment you bring the gender part of it into play, though I at least my last 10 years, I told everybody who listened to me that I
Yeah.
was completely gender agnostic. Okay,
Sure.
completely gender agnostic to that extent, that I truly believed that if you had to reach to the top, there were also allowances that you had to make in your own ways of life. For instance, I have seen a lot of women. Let's understand, there are two sides of the same coin. You can be a woman, you can strive hard, you can make it big, and yet you can crib and you can start expecting allowances to be made for you. That's the time when the downfall happens, because
Hmm.
you can't have the cake and eat it too. That's
Right.
not possible. If
Right.
you are going to rise to the top, you've got to forget about the fact that you belong to a certain sex.
Yeah.
If you are going to hold the mantle of a head of the department, you've got to run the race like every other person does. There, you can't make excuses like my child is crying back home and I have to rush back. You've got to put
Yeah.
your support systems in place so that at any instance,
Yeah.
you don't give the opportunity to the person on the other side to
Yeah.
say that no, there is a difference in the conduct of two people. So if a woman were to take that position, there would always be an element of question mark. But if a
Right.
man donned the hat, you could just close your eyes and get it done. So
Sure.
that's when a woman actually puts a hammer or puts an axe to her own feet. And many women leave the race halfway because they are not
Yes.
sure whether they can withstand that level of heat, rise to the top, and deliver
Absolutely.
agnostic to their sex and gender. That's
Absolutely.
when they bid by. So you see so many competent women at the
Yeah.
level of general managers and vice presidents, and then the moment they are there for the final leap, they say sorry. They've suddenly quit.
Yes. And
And that
the
is
reason.
something that is something which I can't swallow, because
Sure.
that's not fair. Because on one hand, you are giving the impression that because of being a member of a certain sex, you need to be treated differently, which is
Differently.
not the case, which should never be the case. On the other
Sure.
hand, you are also taking the position which you did not fulfill and go all the way. You left it halfway, eating into the opportunity that somebody else could have made good of.
Yeah. Yeah.
That again is not fair in a corporate world.
Absolutely. It's not. And, the reason I asked you this question is because there are a lot of women leaders listening to us right now. And I'm sure it is a question that is at the back of the mind of every working woman. And being in senior positions, it's important to know the trade off, as in, what is it that, what is it that you can expect. And I agree with you that if we are looking at, a fair chance, to be treated as equals, then definitely, being a woman or having a specific gender should not be, an excuse to not being available for a few things, or, for example, traveling, or, attending meetings, etc., offsite. So,
No,
I
not just
completely
that.
agree with
Not
you.
just that. If you are told that you've got to attend a late night meeting,
Yes.
which
Yes.
ends at 4 a.m. in the morning,
Yeah.
okay, because you
Yeah.
had to finish that meeting, it was a strategic meeting, then you better just have a smile and say, bring on the coffee.
Yes.
That's the only response you need to have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The other thing
Yes.
that I must tell you is a lot of women themselves remain apologetic about their own positions. Please, let's not be apologetic. Do the same thing that a man does. When a
Yeah.
man starts climbing the hierarchy, they start visual, the visibility of what they do. They
Yeah.
also orchestrate and make that come forth. So they
Yeah.
will go create opportunities for photo shoots. They will go and give bites. They will go on social media, splurge what they're doing. But why should the women be apologetic about it when they are doing the same?
Yeah.
So visible.
Absolutely.
Nobody is going to do your talking. But if
Yeah.
you are an achiever, if you are somebody who's because of your competence and your worth is making it the rough way, then you might as well play the game the same way that every man does.
Absolutely. I,
So a
uh,
little
you
bit
know,
of thick skinned, being
yeah.
ability to not get swayed by every man's opinion,
Yeah.
okay, and that resolution in your mind that I've been honest, I've been conscientious, and I've got it the hard way. I'm not going to give it up for anybody, for that matter, is what will take you that extra mile.
Awesome. I think that's going to help a lot of women leaders who are listening to us right now. That's some very, very candid advice, which normally, you would not get unless and until you, talk to a lady who's been there in that situation herself. And thanks, Devjani, for being so candid and being and sharing this difficult journey, because it is difficult for everyone. It is
Yeah.
difficult. I know it because I've also been a part of the corporate world, so I know there is a certain level of difficulty that you face because of your gender. But irrespective, I would say it's a decision that you make. It's a choice that you have. Nobody is
Yeah.
forcing you to, do anything,
Absolutely.
or, continue to work. It's a choice that you always have with you. So rather than playing, the victim card in terms of, why is it happening to me? It's happening to me because I'm a woman. Well, you always have a choice to make. So the choice is completely
I call
yours.
it the Cinderella syndrome. You go the lovely way, you acquire
Yeah.
everything, and then when the going gets tough at 12 o'clock midnight,
The
woe
Brits didn't
behold,
come.
you vanish.
Yes, absolutely. I love the analogy of the Cinderella syndrome. Okay, I think we can continue forever because there are just so many questions I have in my mind. But I'll take one question from the audience, one last question from the audience. Shika here is asking, can you please throw some light on the moral values a leader should nourish the team on, and not just HR in a work from home module, because that keeps the culture of the organization integrated. So I think what she means to ask is how can a leader, I think, inculcate some moral values in a work from home, model, because it's that is what keeps the culture of the organization integrated, and the core values intact. I think that's probably what she means.
Thank you, Shikha. Very good question. I think, yes, you're right. The responsibility of creating that level of consciousness, as well as making sure that the ethical part of how work should get done, lies with the leader. But it's an equal responsibility even on the team. Let's
Yeah,
understand that, because it is not enough to keep lashing the whip at the leader and the manager, because they anyways have enough on their platter, let me tell
yeah,
you, and they are in a struggle of their own. So we should not demean that struggle just because we feel the work from home struggle is the ultimate that has come to stay. I think every struggle has its own pain points. Having said
True.
that, I think transparency in communication, keeping communication channels very frequent and wide open, which means that the leader should be able to take calls, should be able to entertain calls from any of the team members at any point of time, given that there can be a crisis, there can be a period when there is a depression setting in, and that workforce person needs to talk to somebody and really de stress. These are the kind of things that the leader needs to definitely adapt. Because
Right.
if he or she is able to show that level of empathy, that level of adaptability, and the simple humanness of being available,
Yeah.
approachability, as we call it,
Yeah.
if you can assure your team that you are approachable and that they can reach out to you in their moments of stress, I think those are the kind of things which can bind an enabling culture together, irrespective of whether you're at home or whether you're at the workspace. Similarly, I think what is a responsibility for people who are in that work from home situation, the team
Hmm.
members, should be to be honest. Okay.
Absolutely.
I know of situations where there are people who are skirting work, who are shirking work, but they seem to be making an imagery out of, oh my God, there is so much stress, and even Sundays are going into doing meetings. It's not true. That's not the whole picture. Let's
Yeah.
understand that there is an element of gray. It is not black and white. And in that gray, to have composure, to be honest enough, if you are going through difficulties, express that to your leader. The best thing you
True.
can do, as I said, is transparency in the communication, because physically you're no longer together. So that
True.
needs to be therefore compensated with a lot of honesty and transparency. And somewhere during those exchanges, a sense of trust and faith does come to play a big role and ultimately keeps the culture together. I think
Absolutely.
it's wrong for us to look for bigger jargons. Let's say simple, let's stay
Yeah.
grounded. If we can
Yeah.
follow these few simple procedures, I think
Yeah.
at least the fundamental rules of creating the teams for tomorrow can come into play.
I love the very balanced view that you've given. That normally, like this question also, it's a great question, and it focuses on how a leader can nourish the team, how the leader can inculcate core values and make sure the culture is intact. But I think what we often fail to realize is that it's not just the leader who has the onus of owning up the culture; it's also the people,
Yeah,
on the other side of the table, people who are working from home, also to have that, to instill that trust in the leader, that you are there for the organization, you are working for the organization, there is no work shirking. And in these times, we've very sadly also came across people working in dual employments, and people doing side gigs and all of that, without the knowledge of the employer. Now that, I would say, is a it's something that, I would say, is not in tandem with the trust part, when we talk about the trust part, because it's a two-way road. It's not
yes,
it's not a one way, it's a two-way road. And the as much as the leader has the responsibility of being the culture keeper, I would say, people also have the responsibility of upholding the values of the organizations by being honest and transparent. I completely, it's a very beautiful way to answer that question, Devjani. And we
thank
have
you.
some very good, comments coming in. Love the bit about the moral compass and the Cinderella syndrome, approachable, enabling, also true from Vasav Datta. And we have, so I think we could have, continued this session, and we will definitely come back, because all my questions are not answered. I have many, many more questions for you. So we will have a follow-up session very soon. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us, Devjani. One of the most candid chats that I've had in these series, and it's so amazing, to hear from a woman leader talking so candidly about what leadership is. And truly, truly grateful to you, deeply grateful to you for taking out time and talking to us today. And we hope to see you back very, very soon. I'm going to get you back very soon. I have a lot of unanswered questions.
Thank you, Shivani. I think I'm going to take pleasure from that promise that you just made, because this has been an invigorating conversation. I think the very fact that you found the responses candid and to the point were also because the questions also were very, very nicely framed and to the point, because
Thank you.
they have to go hand in hand. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you so much for making this particular platform available. I hope both of us could make some magic together, and let's
Absolutely.
promise to do that even in the future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you, and thank you, audience, for joining us today on a Friday evening. We hope you benefited. I'm sure you all benefited from this session. We had a powerhouse of talent today talking to us straight live, and stay tuned. We'll be back again in a fortnight with another equally inspiring leader. And have a great weekend ahead, guys. And most importantly, please stay safe. Please stay indoors and please stay safe. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Cheers to all. Thank you.